June 2nd, 1984, 6:47 a.m. The ferry cut through the cold San Francisco Bay waters toward a rock island that held America's most dangerous men. Frank Lucas sat in chains, hands cuffed, ankles shackled, watching Alcatraz grow larger through the small window. He was 53 years old. His sentence, 70 years. The prison's nickname, the rock where men went to disappear. The guard escorting him leaned close and whispered, "You're not in Harlem anymore, Lucas. And there, nobody cares who you were. They only care what you are. And right now, you're fresh meat." Frank didn't respond. He just stared at the island, calculating. He'd been in dangerous situations before, rooms full of armed mobsters, confrontations with rival operators, police raids. But this was different. This was a concrete cage filled with men who had nothing to lose, where reputation meant everything and weakness meant death. The ferry docked at 7:03 a.m. Frank stepped onto Alcatraz with one thought repeating in his mind: survive the first 24 hours. Everything else comes after. What happened in those first 24 hours wouldn't just determine whether Frank Lucas survived Alcatraz. It would establish a survival strategy so brilliant that other inmates would study it for years, a strategy built not on violence, but on intelligence, observation, and understanding that power in prison works differently than power on the streets. To understand Frank's strategy, you need to understand what Alcatraz was in 1984. Though the famous federal prison had officially closed in 1963, the facility Frank entered was part of the federal penitentiary system's highest security division, a maximum security unit that housed the most violent, intelligent, and dangerous criminals in America. These weren't street-level operators. These were men who'd killed guards, organized prison riots, escaped from other facilities. Men who'd spent decades behind bars and knew every trick, every weakness, every angle. Men who could smell fear like sharks smell blood. Frank had been in county jails before, even served time in other facilities. But this was different. This was the apex of the American prison system. This was where the government sent people it wanted to forget. The intake process began at 7:15 a.m. Strip search. Delousing shower. Prison uniform, rough cotton, no tailoring, no personalization. They took everything Frank owned, his watch, his wallet, the small photograph of Julie he'd kept in his pocket during the trial. "You'll get one photo in your cell," the intake officer said. "Choose wisely. It's the only piece of the outside world you're allowed." Frank chose the photo of Julie and his children. Not his mother. Not his brothers. His wife and kids. The future he was fighting to someday return to. At 8:30 a.m., they walked Frank to his cell block. The main corridor was long, lined with cells on both sides, 3 tiers high. As Frank walked, the noise hit him, not shouting or chaos, but something worse. Silence. Dead, calculating silence as hundreds of eyes evaluated him. He kept his face neutral. Not scared. Not aggressive. Just calm, observant, aware. His cell was on the second tier, number 247. 6 feet by 9 feet. A metal cot. A toilet. A sink. A single shelf. This would be his world for the foreseeable future. The guard uncuffed him. "Lunch is at noon. Stay in your cell until then. Don't cause trouble. Don't make friends. Don't make enemies. Just do your time." Then the guard left, and Frank was alone. But he wasn't really alone. He could feel the presence of other inmates, listening, waiting, judging. First day in prison is like first day in any new environment. People test you, probe for weakness, determine where you fit in the hierarchy. Frank sat on his cot and did something that surprised the inmates watching: nothing. He didn't pace. Didn't look nervous. Didn't try to make conversation through the bars. He just sat, back straight, eyes forward, breathing steady. This was step 1 of Frank's strategy, Project Calm. Not arrogance, arrogance gets you tested. Not fear, fear gets you victimized. Just calm, centered presence. The kind of presence that makes people wonder what you know that they don't. At 11:45 a.m., the cell doors opened electronically. Time for lunch. Frank stood, walked out, and joined the line of inmates heading to the cafeteria. This was the moment he'd been preparing for mentally, the first real interaction, the first opportunity to be sized up, challenged, or tested. The cafeteria was massive, filled with long metal tables bolted to the floor. Frank grabbed a tray, something that looked like meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and bread, and turned to find a seat. Here's where most new inmates make their first mistake. They either sit alone, marking themselves as weak and isolated, or they try to join an established group, marking themselves as desperate for protection. Frank did neither. He walked to a table that had one man sitting at it, an older inmate reading a book. Frank sat down, not next to the man, but across from him, close enough to acknowledge his presence, far enough to respect his space. The man looked up. He was in his 60s, gray-haired, calm eyes. "You're the new fish." "I'm Frank Lucas." "I know who you are." "Everybody knows who you are." "Question is, do you know where you are?" "Alcatraz." "Wrong. You're in a place where your name don't mean nothing. Where your money don't mean nothing. Where the only thing that matters is how you carry yourself today, right now, in this moment." Frank nodded slowly. "What's your name?" "Samuel." "Been here 11 years. Gonna be here 11 more, probably." "What did you do before?" "Before don't matter. There is no before. There's only now." This was Frank's first real lesson. In prison, your past is irrelevant unless it serves your present. Nobody cared that Frank had been powerful in Harlem, that he'd negotiated with mafia bosses, that he'd built a multi-million-dollar empire. And here, he was just another number, another inmate, another man trying to survive. Lunch passed quietly. Frank ate slowly, observing everything. The groups at different tables, racial divisions were clear but not absolute. The guards positioned around the perimeter, watching but not interfering unless necessary. The subtle signals between inmates, a nod here, a glance there, a whole language of prison communication he needed to learn. After lunch, inmates had 2 hours of yard time. This was the most dangerous period. Outside, less supervision, more opportunities for violence. Frank walked into the yard at 12:47 p.m. The California sun was bright, almost mocking given the circumstances. The yard was divided into informal zones, one corner for weightlifting, another for basketball, groups of men talking, smoking, dealing in the prison's underground economy. Frank found a spot along the fence, away from groups but visible, and stood there. Just stood. Watching. Learning. That's when they approached. 3 men. Young, muscular, confident. The leader was about 30, covered in prison tattoos, eyes that had seen and done terrible things. "You're Frank Lucas." "I am." "We heard about you. Big-time operator from New York. Made millions. Wore fancy coats. Lived like a king." Frank said nothing. "You know what happens to kings in prison, Frank? They get reminded they're just men. Sometimes painfully. This was the test. This was the moment every new inmate faces, the moment where you establish who you are. Fight and prove you're dangerous. Run and prove you're weak. Or find a third option." Frank looked at the leader calmly. "What's your name?" The question surprised him. "Marcus." "Marcus, I'm going to tell you something, and you can choose to believe it or not. I'm not here to be a king. I'm not here to challenge anyone. I'm here to do my time, keep my head down, and go home to my family. I'm not your enemy unless you make me one." "That sounds like weakness." "No," Frank said quietly. "That sounds like intelligence. You want to test me? Go ahead. But ask yourself what you gain. If you win, you beat up an old man on his first day. Congratulations. You get nothing. If I win, and I've been fighting since I was 10 years old, so don't assume anything, you lose respect. Either way, we both lose. Marcus stared at Frank for a long moment. What are you proposing? I'm proposing we don't have to be friends. We don't have to be anything. But we don't have to be problems for each other either. You think it's that easy? I think everything in here is as complicated as we make it. I'd rather make it simple. Marcus smiled, not friendly but not hostile. You're different than I expected. Most people are when you talk to them instead of assuming. Marcus nodded slowly, then walked away with his crew. Crisis averted. Not through violence. Not through submission. Through conversation, logic, and the subtle art of making your opponent realize fighting you serves no purpose. Frank had passed the first test. That evening, back in his cell, Frank reflected on the day. He'd learned several critical things. First, prison hierarchy exists, but it's fluid. Respect is earned daily, not inherited from your past. Second, violence is always an option, but it's rarely the best option. Every fight creates enemies, attracts attention from guards, extends your sentence. Third, the smartest inmates aren't the strongest or most aggressive. They're the ones who understand psychology, who can read people, who can turn potential conflicts into neutral relationships. Fourth, survival in prison requires the same skills that made Frank successful outside: observation, strategic thinking, understanding what people really want, and offering it to them without losing yourself. At 8 p.m., Samuel stopped by Frank's cell. I heard about the yard. News travels fast. Always does. You handled that well. Marcus respects strength, but he respects smart even more. You showed him both. I just told him the truth. The truth is a weapon most people don't know how to use. You do. I learned from the best. Bumpy Johnson? Frank nodded. I knew Bumpy. Long time ago, different facility. He taught you well. The best survival strategy isn't avoiding conflict, it's making conflict illogical. That became Frank's philosophy for his entire incarceration. Make conflict illogical. Don't make enemies. Don't make yourself a target. Don't participate in prison politics. Don't join gangs. Don't owe anyone anything. Stay clean, stay quiet, stay focused on the goal, getting out. Over the next weeks and months, Frank built a reputation in Alcatraz that was unusual. He wasn't feared. He wasn't loved. He was respected. Inmates came to him for advice, not criminal advice, but life advice. How to write letters to family. How to appeal sentences. How to stay mentally strong when hope seems impossible. Frank never asked for anything in return. Never built debts. Never created obligations. He just helped when he could, minded his business when he couldn't, and maintained the same calm, intelligent presence he'd shown on day one. The guards noticed too. Frank never caused trouble, never filed frivolous complaints, never participated in the underground economy that made prison life complicated. After 6 months, one guard told him, "You're doing time different than most, Lucas. Most guys fight it every day. You're just doing it." "Fighting time doesn't make it go faster," Frank replied. "Accepting it and using it, that's different." "Using it for what?" "To become someone my family can be proud of when I get out." 3 years into his sentence, Frank's strategy paid off in an unexpected way. His lawyer, Richie Roberts, the same detective who'd arrested him, was working on his appeal. The prosecuting attorney needed character witnesses, people who could speak to Frank's behavior, his rehabilitation, his potential for successful reintegration into society. Normally, finding such witnesses from prison is impossible. But Frank had built something rare, genuine respect from both inmates and guards. 5 guards and 3 long-term inmates volunteered to write letters supporting Frank's appeal. One letter, from Samuel, read, "Frank Lucas entered this facility as a convicted criminal. But every day, I've watched him become something else, a mentor, a counselor, a man trying to make amends for his past by helping others avoid his mistakes. If rehabilitation is possible, Frank Lucas is proving it. In 1981, after serving 5 years, Frank's sentence was reduced. Not because of legal technicalities. Because he demonstrated genuine change, genuine rehabilitation, genuine transformation. When Frank walked out of federal custody in 1981, reporters asked him, "How did you survive prison?" Frank's answer was simple: "I survived prison the same way I survived Harlem. By understanding that real power isn't physical. It's mental. It's knowing when to fight and when to think. It's making yourself valuable instead of making yourself feared. And it's remembering that every day you have a choice: become harder or become better. I chose better." Years later, Frank gave a talk to at-risk youth in Harlem. A young man asked, "Mr. Lucas, what was the hardest day of your life?" "My first day in Alcatraz," Frank answered without hesitation. Why? Because that was the day I had to choose who I was going to be. The streets taught me to be tough. Prison taught me to be smart. The difference saved my life. What would you tell someone facing that choice? Frank thought for a moment. I'd tell them what I learned in those first 24 hours. Strength without intelligence is just violence waiting to happen. Intelligence without strength is vulnerability. But when you combine both, when you're strong enough to fight but smart enough to know when not to, that's when you become untouchable. Not because people can't hurt you, but because they have no reason to try. The first day in Alcatraz could have destroyed Frank Lucas. Instead, it taught him the most valuable lesson of his life. True survival isn't about being the toughest person in the room. It's about being the smartest. It's about making peace more valuable than war. It's about understanding that the strongest position isn't domination. It's making yourself so valuable, so reasonable, so intelligent that conflict serves no one's interests. Frank Lucas entered Alcatraz as a criminal. He left as a man who understood something most people never learn: the prison isn't the walls around you. It's the choices you make inside them. If this story of survival, strategy, and transformation inspired you, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you believe intelligence beats aggression every time. Share this with someone who's facing their own Alcatraz, whatever form it takes. And let me know in the comments, what's the hardest first day you've ever faced? More legendary stories of survival and wisdom coming soon. Don't miss it.